The first 3 fights for UFC 312 in Sydney on Feb 9th have been announced. Let's break them down. Welcome to the Australian MMA podcast. My name is Mitch Tinley. Now, of course, this podcast powered by the great Vex. Make sure you check them out at the end of the video to find out a little bit what they can offer and how they can help you. But the first 3 fights have been announced officially by the UFC for UFC 312. Of course, Jimmy Crute, Quillan Salkilld, and Stewart Nicoll on the card. Now you're looking between 12 to 15 fights. And look, every Australian New Zealand fighter wants to be on this card. There's about 22 to 24 active UFC fighters from our region, and now already 3 fights have been taken. Now, there's a fair few people on the card that want to get on the card. I'm going to go through it as well before we break down those fights. Just who may and may not be on the card. Now, there's nothing on my paper. They're blood results, but it looked cool. Now, there's a bit of scariness heading into the cards. It might not have that blockbuster pop. Now, Australian cards are always the best cards ever, and even if it's just stacked with Australian MMA regional fighters, I would still watch it and it would still be a banger of a card. But when it comes to that main event pop, we just might not have it. Now, Rob Whittaker will probably not be on the card, almost confirmed after he has to have jaw surgery with his teeth pushed in, whatnot, against his fight with Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev, who is also coming over in a month or two for a seminar, he will actually probably have to wait for the winner of who we would have, the 2 middleweight guys that have fought here before, Sean Strickland and DDP. DDP, of course, would fight here before, and Sean Strickland is basically the number 1 contender. And the New South Wales government has said, we do not want you to come in to the country. Just says a lot of shit like, get back in the kitchen. And then he's all like, why do you guys hate me? But yeah, look, Sydney and the New South Wales government's always been quite tricky with MMA, although they're basically paying for the UFC to come. They really don't make it easy for regional MMA shows. So look, you can see why there's a bit of trepidation when it comes to bringing in a man like Sean Strickland. So he probably will not get in to the country. I also think he has a criminal conviction, but I won't dive into that. Israel Adesanya, I don't think they're looking at bringing him either. Timing and stuff just doesn't really work out. Volkanovski wanted to be on the card, but he wants his next fight to be a title fight, and rightfully so. He's an absolute legend of the game, and Ilia Topuria will not fly to Australia, despite what he's saying stuff publicly. What I'm hearing behind closed doors, he will not fly to Australia to defend his belt. I mean, you can understand why he's a champion now. Why would you want to kind of fly halfway across the world into enemy territory to give the man that you just knocked out sort of another attribute to add to the fight? So I can understand why that's not happening. Dan Hooker wants kind of either a BMF title fight, which I think he well and truly deserves in somewhat, or a top 5 fighter, all of which will not come out to Australia from what I am hearing. So it's going to be sort of unfortunate on the CKB end because their sort of adopted home being essentially Sydney. So it's going to be very tricky to sort of see any of those boys on the cards. And then the other guys trickling out either unfortunately didn't get signed on Dana White Contender Series, or Navajo Sterling, who is fighting in December. So the kind of timing doesn't exactly line up. Guys that also were looking to try and get on the card, like we said, it doesn't look likely with Rob Whittaker, and Volk might obviously not get his fight as well, with Topuria not coming out, and that's why you're kind of hearing the sort of interim title fight with Diego Lopez being floated around for Sydney, which could be possible. Now, when you kind of go further down on the star power, if you will, my unofficial pick, I think Jack Jenkins is one of the biggest needle movers when it comes to mixed martial arts. I would say he's definitely on the card. They're just sort of nailing down an opponent. Wouldn't be surprised if it's already in. I believe the options were Darren Elkins and Andre Feely that were being sort of thrown around. But Jack Jenkins is going to be a start. The UFC even thinks so. So I wouldn't even be surprised if we see him pop on the main card, maybe in the first fight, or at least, a really sort of featured prelim bout. I do know that Jake Matthews, I think, is signed. Just his opponent hasn't been revealed, or at least he's very close to. There's a few other names popping around. Jack Della, they'll put on the card, just whether it's Usman, Colby Covington. Although if you don't let Strickland in, you probably won't let in Donald Trump's favourite fighter, Colby Covington, into the country either. So, I mean, we still want that Shavkat, even though he's taking on Bilal Muhammad. So we'll see what happens there. Does Jack Della get kind of a title fight? Do they throw that around? What happens? Or do we get that Usman fight? He basically said he verbally agreed, and Usman verbally agreed. So hopefully we can see that one on February 2 for UFC 312. Now, for the fights that have been announced. Oh, and also this one will kind of slide in, I guess. We've got Quillan Salkilld taking on Anshul Jubli. Now, if you watch Quillan Salkilld both in the regional scene or even on Contender Series when he got that decision victory over Gage Young, you'd say this fight sort of really favours Quillan Salkilld. Now, anyone can beat anyone on any given night. You know, you'd say fights 50-50, but there is an A side and a B side. I do think this fight is being set up as a launching pad for Mr. Salkilld to sort of really showcase his talent, especially on the Australian scene and then on the world scene. I think this will be a great performance for Quillan. Look for, you know, like a submission of the night, performance of the night type deal from Quillan. Not to say that it's not a tough fight. It's a hell of a tough fight. Jubilee's already, I think, 1-1 in the UFC, but Quillan should be able to sort of really dominate in any way he sees fit. Also, we've got, I think it's Rei Tsuruya. God, I'm a bloody good journalist. Taking on Stewart Nicoll. Now, Stewart Nicoll, I've had critiques of in the past, but when he took on Jesus Aguilera, I actually thought he was doing really, really well. Obviously, it's hard to say he was winning the fight at UFC 305, I think it was, in Perth. It's hard to say he was winning the fight when he ended up losing in the first round. But look, I thought he did really, really well. And if you've watched him train, I got the pleasure to do so, watching him at Team Compton, just the way he moves, how he goes about it. He cops a lot of shit by a lot of people because he's been a little bit more hidden in the regional scene. But man, Stewart Nicoll's got it all, man. I know it's like unpopular for some people, but I really do think he can be quite good, and I think he was doing very good against a guy, Jesus Aguilera, who's a very, very good fighter in the UFC. So Stewart Nicoll, look, I think it's a little grappler v grappler style. If you look at the article at Australian MMA written by the great Australian UFC insider Benny P, who's doing a lot of stuff on Australian MMA. The problem with Rei is he's like 22, up and comer. So you kind of go, what's the UFC's sort of game here? You know, are they trying to sort of give this sort of platform so that Rei can come in and sort of put on a display by beating the hometown boy? I don't know. I'd say it might favour Rei, but as a man that likes to think he knows the sport, do not count Stewie Nicoll out yet. I think he still has a lot to give, despite what others might say at times. Now, we've got the Jimmy Crute final fight that was announced. Of course, the 3 fights announced, if you haven't realised already. I just imagine you guys play me on in the background, so you kind of forget what I say sometimes while I ramble. We've got Quillan Salkilld, Anshul Jubli, and then Stewart Nicoll with Rei Tsuruya. So I'm bloody good at names. Finally, Jimmy Crute taking on Marcin Prachnio. Jimmy Crute versus Marcin Prachnio. I'll tell you what, they're not using me in any UFC highlights anytime soon. But look, Marcin 17-8, Jimmy Crute 12-4 and 1 draw. Unfortunately, Jimmy Crute has been on a bit of a skid lately. I think 3 losses, 1 draw, and hasn't won technically in 4 years now. A man, he's only 28 years old. He's an absolute stud. He's still got such a bright future. After his recent loss to Menifield, he put his gloves in the cage, center of the cage type thing to he got told to pick them up quite quickly. He's kind of he deleted his social media for a little while. I think he just, from what I'm hearing, is he was just his whole life was around fighting, and hopefully I'll get to chat to him before his fight and dive into that. It was actually our first ever interview on Australian MMA. If you go way back when this was triple MMA. Jimmy Crute is, I think, done a little bit of soul searching type thing. I think he's back with Australian Elite Team. He's obviously done some work with freestyle MMA as well, and the boys of Australian Elite Team under Sam Greco, of course, Kit Campbell, who's gearing up for his own title fight on the regional scene, hopefully gets his UFC chance soon. Jake Matthews, just done a lot of work with those guys. I think he's even mixed up with John and McAuliffe, which hopefully we could see on this card as well, probably to open the card with how that man is going. But yeah, Jimmy Crute's got a real opportunity. Of course, he's quite young, but at this stage in his UFC career, I wouldn't be surprised if a loss gets him cut, unfortunately. And then it's kind of like, where does he go from there? Because there's no one in Australia that he sort of would put him against. So, yeah, I think he's kind of backs against the wall. He's against a guy, Marcin Prachnio, Prachnio. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Who is a tough guy, but Jimmy definitely can beat. He's actually beaten, is it Bukakis? Marcin lost to him, and Jimmy has beaten him. So if you want to play a bit of MMA math, Jimmy Crute definitely has the keys to victory. But yeah, I reckon this fight is for the UFC to kind of find out like where Jimmy's at, like where's his head at, kind of what's he want to do, where's he at with fighting type thing. And I think, I'm just going to throw this out here without a single opinion whatsoever, but I think if he did get cut, he'd walk away from the UFC. I don't know how you can keep a guy that's 0-4 and 1, despite how amazing Jimmy Crute is. So I would say this is definitely kind of win or go home for Mr. Jimmy. And I truly do think he can be a very, very good fighter, and he can be a real contender, despite the recent skid. If you watch his like early round and stuff against Anthony Smith a couple of years ago, he looked on fire, and he has looked very, very impressive in stints. And I think it's just that little mental hurdle, and he's still young, and hopefully once he gets over that and gets back into his groove, which from all accounts he very much is, Jimmy Crute could kind of burst back onto the scene. So there you go, guys. There you guys go. Man, I'm bloody on fire today. The first 3 fights officially announced by the UFC for UFC 312 February 9th. Remember, guys, hit up australianmma.com.au if you want to find out more. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps out a lot. Let us know in the comments who you want to see fighting. I did hear rumors of Tommy Nolan. He's probably going to be announced soon as well. The UFC is very high on Tom Nolan, as they should be. But who do you think is going to get on the card? Like I said, there's 24 fighters, and there's not a whole lot of spots. Josh Kulabau will probably get on the card. I mean, he's a hometown boy. So, I mean, one of your favourites, in fact, a lot of your favourites are going to have to miss out. So who do you desperately need to see on the card? Other than that, guys, stick around for a message from Vex, who obviously helped me put on this lovely show for you guys to secretly watch in the office. But other than that, I'll see you at the next update. PRP Global and Vex have joined forces, so keep an eye out. Launching mid-November, they've got a new Vex website and new MMA fightwear range releasing shortly. Vex, designed for combat and worn by the best in Australia.